that was...
We're back again now. We're back again now for part 2 with this very interesting conversation with, again, Dr. Michio Kaku. He's professor of theoretical physics, New York University, City University of New York. Written this incredibly exciting book that we've had part 1. We talked last week. This week we're taking up where we left off last week. And again, the book is called, let's show it, Hyperspace. It's published by Oxford University Press, and I think it would be worthwhile right at the outset letting people know that as we talk now in mid-July of 1994, this book is a runaway bestseller nationally. It's 17 on the list nationally, and for a science book about theories of relativity and such whatnot, rather than other romanticized other kinds of things, that's quite a feat. And Michio Kaku, welcome very, very much to the conversation to talk about your runaway best-selling book that should sell even more, if I may say so, Hyperspace. And once again, welcome very, very much to the conversation.
Well, thank you very much.
I guess that is the truth. It's taking off very well. It's selling well nationally.
Beyond my comprehension, you know. In fact, it's been 7 weeks on the San Francisco Chronicle bestseller list. It's just below the New York Times bestseller list. And it's just taken off. The reviews in the newspaper have been fantastic. It made the cover of the New York Times, San Francisco Chronicle, and the Philadelphia Inquirer book review section. The Wall Street Journal raved about it, the Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, Chicago Tribunes. All of them gave it a rave review.
Larry King talked to you about it, right?
That's right. I was on his radio program, and the TV program was also taped and will be aired shortly. Yeah. And so it's been basically a runaway bestseller. And remember, science books, as you pointed out, are very rarely on the bestseller list.
I don't think they do. I think Lewis Thomas made it, with Lives of a Cell and that sort of thing, and I guess a few others and so forth. But people are, you're right, it's a hard sell, as it usually is, because... And people are maybe been unduly frightened because it seems this is something I'll never be able to understand. But in point of fact, this book is particularly good because it is a book that makes these things accessible to anyone in a very real sense, as long as they can stick with it. It's written in a language, and for that, even I can talk somewhat about it. And I've read it all the way through and find it interesting. I still don't understand a great deal of it.
Well, that's what we're here today.
Yeah, and I appreciate your bearing with me and my naivete. We were talking about the history of physics and the understanding, and we got up to the point, and you were introducing it and wanted to introduce, because you've been a particular proponent of this superstring theory, right? And you said that both in the marble and in the wood and in the unified field, or the Einstein relativistic and the quantum traditions of Max Planck and so forth, that they both reached a certain dead end. And we mentioned black holes, but we were just sort of, in a sense, bringing it up to the tremendous excitement of the more or less contemporary moment, which is the last few years. Now, this superstring or superstring theory, or is it supergravity or superstring theory?
Superstring theory incorporates
and there's somebody named Kaluza Klein that resurrected the Einstein went into eclipse, and then for some time the quantum mechanics were there, and then Kaluza Klein was... Could you maybe just, am I correct in that?
Right. Or, let me just summarize in just a few sentences the last 2,000 years
my mumblings,
of Greek science. Right. And there have been two great traditions in science. One is the tradition of Einstein, which deals with smooth space and warping of space and big bangs and black holes. That's a tradition of relativity, dealing with the big picture, the cosmos as a whole.
Stephen Hawking?
Stephen Hawking belongs to that tradition.
Yes.
Then there's another tradition that I belong to, and this tradition is a tradition of quantum physicists. We don't work with big bangs and black holes. We work with the infinitely small, that is, the quantum universe of tiny quarks and protons and neutrons and gamma rays and all that stuff you read about in science fiction novels with radiation and stuff like that. That's the quantum theory. That's where I come from. And the problem is that these two great theories can summarize all human physical knowledge into two spheres. The sphere of marble, the sphere of Einstein, or the sphere of wood, which is the theory of quarks and neutrons and protons. And the two things don't match together. And
the one is a more holistic, and the one is a more quantified.
That's right. The theory of wood was more of a reductionist approach, because we smash atoms. We take a neutron and a proton, and we just smash it with our atom smashers and busted up into even more particles. And we got thousands of particles now that we don't know what to do with. And then the other tradition is more of a holistic tradition, looking at the universe as a whole.
It's a little disquieting to say we have thousands of particles that we don't know what to do with. I mean, they're there. It's rather like putting together the toy with the child and having a few parts left over at the end. Or a lot of the stuff that's on the DNA. There's a lot of stuff that seems to be unnecessary, as we understand. But go ahead. I'm sorry. I just threw that
Well,
in.
Biology is a good
I mean,
example.
it must be there for
you
some
see?
reason.
You see, back in the 1950s...
I mean, there's a design behind this.
There's a design behind this. There's a method to all this madness.
This is one of the big principles that we'll want to get to, whether the design and universe. So go ahead, yeah.
Right. Well, biology is a good example. The 1950s, people thought
things
that...
we don't know what to do with. Yeah, well, go ahead.
Yeah, in the 1950s, people thought that life was so complicated that we would never understand why we have horses and pigs and humans and snakes, and it seemed as if we're never going to get anywhere with unifying life. Then they discovered a string. The string was called DNA, and with 3 billion base pairs, 100,000 genes, you could create a human, or a crab, or an amoeba.
The Watson and Crick.
That's right.
And when was that? When did they come?
The 1950s.
In the 50s, okay.
They discovered a string called DNA.
Yeah, a double helix.
Double helix, two strings wrapped around like that.
Now, I would ask you, we'll get to that and so forth, because we want to see the holistic linking of the theory of everything with biological process as well as inanimate and animate objects. But someone might be able to say that oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I was going to ask you, why string? In terms of this basic thing, but maybe that's jumping ahead.
No, it's very simple, because biology is a good example.
All right,
before the 1950s, books were written about the fact that nature was so incredibly complicated, and you had to be specialized in pigs and horses and snakes, and they would never be able to have a synthesis of everything. And then when they discovered the double helix, that is two strings wrapped around each other like that, we began to realize that the string is perhaps the most compact way in which to store fabulous amounts of information.
As they do in DNA.
A simple little string is the simplest way to cram an enormous amount of information that is the blueprint for pigs and horses and snakes and crabs and human beings. So all of a sudden, a unifying principle began to unite all of biology. And that unifying principle was the discovery of the DNA molecule, the blueprint that had fantastic amount of information in that string. Now,
all of which was interconnected as a system.
That's right.
They're all chemically interconnected.
So
amazing.
It's amazing, right?
They're absolutely mind-boggling.
So out of specialization came unification. Physics went through the same process. We had specialization in gravity. People were specializing in light. People specializing in the weak force and the strong nuclear force. People specializing in all these different areas, but no one thinking about the big picture. That is, what does it mean for all these forces? Then about 10 years ago, the fundamental breakthrough was made that perhaps strings, vibrating strings inside the quark, that perhaps all these thousands of particles are nothing but resonances, just vibrational modes on a string. Now think of a violin string. When you play the violin, you don't think that the note C is a fundamental note. D is just as fundamental, or F sharp. Any note is as fundamental as any other note, because what is really fundamental is the violin string.
Right.
Today we think that all these resonances correspond to particles. And that's why we have so many particles, because we have so many vibrations of a cosmic violin string, so tiny you can't even see it, but that each mode of the violin string corresponds to a particle.
Now, is that so small, like what they call a Planck length, or am I wrong?
That's right. That is,
and
take a decimal point.
It's ridiculously small.
Yeah, take a decimal point with 33 zeros after it,
right.
And that's an incredibly small number with the number 1.
And this is what the mathematics gives us?
Now, mathematics gives us the fact that these strings are incredibly tiny, but they, just like DNA, give us a unifying way to look at the entire thing we call force.
Now, this was contained within the thinking of Kaluza,
that's right.
Klein, which had to be discovered by students by stealth almost in the days when they were training, because it wasn't taught normally in the physics as you were coming up.
That's
if
right.
I read that correctly.
That's right.
And it helped to resurrect the Einstein view of the thing.
That's right. You see, the Einstein view was that pure geometry could explain matter and everything around us. That we, in some sense,
and reaching for the theory of everything.
Right. So Einstein's theory of everything was that space would condense, and space would condense into people. And just like a cloud condensing out of nothing, all of a sudden space would have kinks in it, little kinks in space, and these kinks in space would be called particles. Okay? So Einstein realized that he had a theory of kinks that wasn't big enough to explain the forces of nature. So what Kaluza did in the 1920s was he took the idea of the mystics and Picasso and Dali and philosophers who thought about the fourth spatial dimension. And Kaluza said, well, look, everyone talks about the fourth dimension, the fourth dimension. Why not take the fourth dimension seriously? Put it into Einstein's equation.
Now, had that come into the art and so forth from the physics? Or
It came in from the arts and from the mystics and from the mathematicians.
And had it come from Einstein?
No, it did not come from Einstein.
It did not.
Kaluza was just doodling away one day.
Now, when are we talking? When is he?
1919 is when he first came out with his theory. Just a
Okay.
few years after Einstein
Einstein's
himself.
relativity in what, 1905? Or?
1915 is when he came out with the full theory of gravity. The full theory of gravity.
Okay, go ahead, sorry.
And see, what Einstein did was he added the three dimensions of space, and he had one more dimension, he called it time.
Yes, right.
And then out popped out the force of gravity.
Right.
The gravity is nothing but vibrations in four-dimensional space, like a bed sheet, a four-dimensional bed sheet that vibrates. That is called gravity. Okay? Well, that's a great idea. Add one dimension called time, and all of a sudden, gravity comes out for free. So what Kaluza said was, well, let's keep on going. Why stop at four? Let's add a fifth dimension, or what the mystics called the fourth spatial dimension with no time.
Right.
Today we call it the fifth dimension because we include time. Now, when Kaluza did this, he added the fifth dimension to Einstein's theory, and out popped out the theory of light, as well as a resonance, as well as the old Einstein theory of four dimensions. Now, this is fantastic.
Yes, right.
Two forces for the price of one.
Yes.
Okay? So all of a sudden, you have two jigsaw pieces that didn't fit together. And all of a sudden, you leap into the third dimension. And looking down from the third dimension, these two pieces fit right together.
Whereas they hadn't.
They hadn't before.
To be interaccommodated.
Right.
Yeah.
So think of a crystal, for example, that shatters, and the crystal shatters on a tabletop.
Right.
When people start to put the pieces of the crystal together, they're flatlanders. They cannot visualize a third dimension.
Right.
They have two pieces.
Yeah.
They don't fit together.
They won't work.
They won't work.
And we're trying to make them work.
Until somebody says, take one crystal, leap it into the third dimension, turn, and you have a beautiful crystal. Now, of course, the flatlanders would object and say, that is heresy.
Yeah.
You want to get killed by the church? The church says there are only two dimensions. There's nothing called up.
And everyone can see that that's the case, yeah.
Because who ever heard of up? There's no up if you live on a tabletop. But the two pieces of crystal only fit together in the third dimension. That's Kaluza's idea. Kaluza's idea was that one piece of the crystal is gravity. The other piece of the crystal is light. But they don't fit together. These two pieces don't fit together until you lift it in the third dimension and you put it together. And that is now the fourth dimensional theory of gravity.
And he put that together and gave us the idea of looking at it from another dimension.
Right.
And he submitted this to Mr. Einstein. Mr. Einstein held up a couple years.
2 years.
2 years before
he put it
made
in his
it
pocket.
available.
That's right.
He found it interesting or something, but then he found it. Go ahead. Yeah.
Einstein
it's an interesting story. Yeah.
Einstein was so flabbergasted when this obscure mathematician from what is now Kaliningrad in Russia sent him a letter saying, you didn't go far enough. You gave us the fourth dimension, time. Let us now look at the mystics and go to the fifth dimension. And all of a sudden, light comes for free. Well, Einstein was so shocked. He put this in his pocket for 2 years.
Yeah, but he was taken with it.
He was shocked that it was such a simple idea.
Yeah,
he had missed it.
Yeah, right.
He had missed it, that it wasn't revolutionary enough.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, of course, the critics howled at this theory because, no, we don't see this.
And this
extra
fifth dimension became identified with a string that became a circle compactified.
That's right. In other words, people ask, where is this fifth dimension?
Right.
Kaluza said, well, the fifth dimension has to be small because otherwise atoms could leak into this dimension, and we see atoms disappearing. Since atoms don't disappear, this fifth dimension must be very, very small. But then people said,
Did he propose string?
Well, he proposed that the dimension would be very small, like a circle.
Right.
And then people said, well, if it's so small and it's so small you can't see it, then what is the use? And then Kaluza said, no matter how small it is, it vibrates. And because it vibrates, you can see ripples on the surface of the pond. And these ripples is called light.
Uh-huh.
And that's what light is. Light is vibrations
Vibration
in the fifth dimension.
Right,
Just like
right.
gravity is vibrations in the fourth dimension.
And this might be a way in which the light of the stars will be able to come through the absolute vacuum of space to us.
That's
When
right.
we see
In
them?
other words, when light comes to us from the vacuum of outer space,
Which it shouldn't be able to do.
nothing is vibrating. It's
Yeah.
impossible.
Yeah, right.
It's theoretically impossible
Yeah.
for vibrations to go through nothing.
Right,
Right.
right.
But what is vibrating is the unseen fifth dimension, or what the mystics used to call the fourth dimension.
Right.
And then people said,
Exciting stuff.
This is
Yeah.
exciting stuff. Then in the 1930s, people said, well, why stop at 5?
Yeah.
Why not 6, 7, and 8 dimensions? Well, when you start to add these higher dimensions, when you add the 6th, 7th, and 8th dimension, out pops out the weak nuclear force.
And this is how they came upon it.
Well, the weak nuclear force was discovered by, of all people, Madame Curie. Madame Curie discovered radiation and radioactivity.
All right, yeah.
Now, people, when they go to a hospital and they see a department called nuclear medicine,
Yes.
what that department really is a department of weak nuclear medicine.
All right,
The weak force governs radioactive decay.
Right.
Now, today we have these beautiful pictures of the brain called PET scans,
Sure.
or positron emission tomography,
Right.
where you can actually see parts of the brain lighting up like a Christmas tree because that's where sugar is being metabolized, radioactive sugar.
Okay.
That's how we now know how the schizophrenic brain thinks. That's how we know how the thinking process takes place.
We have a picture of
That is the weak nuclear force.
Right.
Nuclear medicine is based on the weak nuclear force.
So that's at least one benefit of the nuclear force that we can see. We can tick off 50% of the gross national product of the planet in
Right.
the electromagnetic spectrum and the Industrial Revolution based on mechanical processes.
That's
but
right.
the strong nuclear forces are just barely developing and may be part of the future.
That's right. So if you add
In
the
terms of
6th
benefit
and
to
7th
the human
dimension.
condition. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
When people say, well, of what use? Of what use is the 6th dimension? The 6th dimension may ultimately make our hospitals tremendous laboratories by which we can understand the human body. Nuclear medicine complements of the 6th, 7th dimension. Well, some people say, that's great. The 4th dimension gives us gravity. The 5th dimension gives us light. The 6th and 7th dimension gives us the weak nuclear force. Why not go for keeps? Go all the way, okay? It turns out that at 10...
One guy said infinite.
Yeah, you think maybe it goes on infinitely, right?
Yeah.
But it turns out that at 10, it actually stops. And the reason for that is in 11 dimensions, the universe is unstable.
All right. Now
There are mathematical inconsistencies that were actually inferred by the great mathematician Ramanujan independently back in the...
Ramanujan was from India, a young man who came in. Oh, go ahead. Ramanujan. Yeah, right.
Well, you see, people say, well, why 10 dimensions? Why not 11 dimensions or 12 dimensions? It turns out that this theory has startled the world of mathematics. Mathematicians were just literally bowled over. New mathematics came pouring out of this hyperspace theory that has startled the world of mathematicians. Now mathematicians are looking at some of these equations.
This is Kaluza-Klein.
This is Kaluza-Klein. And now, of course, the modern incarnation of it, the modern resurrection is the full 10-dimensional string theory.
Yeah.
These strings only vibrate in 10-dimensional space.
And 26.
And 20, there's another string that vibrates in 26
And I'm going to
dimensions.
read a piece out of your book in a minute to try and get you to that. And so with the string dimension, that kind of thing, they vibrate in these dimensions in terms of this superstring theory. But I'm wondering if I could just back up a little bit, because coming historically and so forth, with this Kaluza-Klein resurrecting that. And then there was one, is it Yang Mills-Yang, or something? And where does that fit in?
Okay, right.
Because and what do we mean when we say the standard model?
Okay. Now, remember we talked about two
And then
great...
I think we'll be able to talk superstring.
Okay.
Yeah.
There are two great traditions in physics, as we said. The tradition of beautiful marble, the tradition of Einstein and Mach and Riemann, that is, force is geometry. Pure warping of space and time gives us force. And then the tradition of wood, that is, quarks and leptons and protons and neutrons, thousands of subatomic particles.
Right.
Now, over the last several decades, we've tried to piece together what holds the wood together, what holds the nucleus together, what holds the protons and neutrons together.
Gluons and things.
We now think there's a glue,
Yeah.
a field of glue that holds the quarks together.
Boson?
Well, they're called the Yang-Mills field.
Yeah.
The Yang-Mills field is the boson,
Yeah.
and it is the glue that holds two quarks together. So when a quark and an antiquark rotated around each other, held together by the Yang-Mills field, that is called a meson. When three quarks start to dance around each other, and they're held together by this glue called the Yang-Mills field, that is called a proton.
I
Now,
see.
our bodies are basically held together, therefore, by the Yang-Mills glue.
And are all protons.
All protons. Without the Yang-Mills glue, our bodies would literally disintegrate in a microsecond.
And where does this come from? Yang and Mills?
Yeah, this is now called the standard model,
Yeah.
that after painstakingly analyzing the data from our atom smashers for the last 40 years, smashing atoms, painstakingly putting together each particle in its proper place, we can now reduce it down to perhaps 50 or 60 particles, called the standard model, based on quarks. That we have essentially a whole slew of quarks, a whole slew of Yang-Mills fields, electrons, neutrinos, about 50 particles or so. And that
we
is,
just discovered the top quark.
and the last missing piece, or one of the last missing pieces of the standard model, was the top quark, which made the front page of the New York Times. Because it's sort of like the last of this old puzzle. Now, many of us hate the standard model. I don't know of any physicist who likes the standard model. Because the standard model is simply the weak force, the electromagnetic force, and the strong force scotch taped together, okay, with no gravity. It's ugly as sin.
You mean
it
as
is the
as a
most
formula?
ugly theory you've ever seen.
And a lot of this stuff is in mathematics, right?
If I were to,
it's interesting. Like a musician looks at a score and he sees the music. A mathematician looks at a formula and he sees beauty.
He sees beauty, and when we physicists look at the standard model, we say ugly, ugly, ugly.
That's not Mozart.
That's not Mozart. Now think of it taking a giraffe, scotch taking it to a mule, scotch taking it to a whale, and then saying this is the most beautiful animal that nature has ever created on the surface of the earth.
And this is of people who are coming out of the Planck tradition, or
the tradition of wood.
The quantum.
That's right, the
quantum
tradition.
mechanics theory.
That's right.
Tradition. They say it's ugly.
That the ultimate irony of 50 years of quantum mechanically smashing atoms, looking at all these particles, we finally have the ultimate theory called the standard model, which is ugly as sin.
Ugly as sin.
I teach the standard model. In fact, I wrote a book just last year, a 600-page book with the standard model being the core of the book. It is an ugly theory. It takes 2 pages just to write down the formula for the standard model. It's horrendous. Whoever thought of an equation this big, which would summarize the fundamental laws of the universe. Here's an elephant, here's a giraffe, and here's a whale, scotch taped together.
Are the people that are concerned with this, like you talk about, like unified field, are they reaching for some sort of simplified, elegant thing, or are they happy with the continuation of not having a unified view of things, a comprehensive view of things? I mean,
exactly.
I mean, that's fine. I mean, because that's science, and that's that's the reality, and
But you see, what drives
they don't want this elegant, beautiful.
But you see, what drives musicians? What drives mathematicians? And what drives physicists? What drives us is the search for beauty and simplicity. That's why we are physicists. Okay? That's why we are mathematicians. That's why we are musicians. We don't simply put a bunch of notes on a sheet of paper and call that great music.
But aren't there some people who do? Aren't there some people who just take pure joy in the writing of a mathematical formula and finding another quark?
Yeah, but ultimately it has to be pretty.
That's a funny name. That's a fanciful name, quark.
Well, it was a joke. It was a joke by Mary Gell-Mann.
All right. But again, back to this idea of specialization. There are many people who are very happy to be in the little corner somewhere just working out their little specialized thing,
people.
And aren't, okay, but little people are because we're going to want to get some social metaphors here, and some geopolitical and some other metaphors of what this means for the human condition. And this question of overview or vision. I mean, we had trilateralists on the television the other day, and they're all sitting there, Brzezinski and all these people, and they all essentially said, we have no vision of how we're going to operate interrelated planet, spaceship, Earth.
That's right. See, take a
but
look.
we know how to break up these little pieces of things. But do you understand what I'm getting at?
Well, take a look at the foreign
I mean, most people are lapped in the historical condition.
Look at the politics of the situation. Right? You could be a bureaucrat locked up in this little bureau, okay, the Bureau of XYZ ABC.
And very happy to do your thing as long as you get your check.
And be very happy getting your paycheck.
Make sure you get your checks drawn and everything. That's the life of most people.
Most people are locked up in this little bureaucrat, pushing papers, pushing pencils, being very happy with your little sector of the universe. But that's not presidential leadership.
No, I know. Well, we don't have that kind of leadership.
That's right. One reason why Clinton has been criticized is because he has a bureaucratic thinking that he specializes in little areas without looking at the big picture.
Well, we may be getting a little bit ahead.
This is what separates an Einstein from an average physicist.
Well, okay. I was just trying to say there are many people who you say that thing is ugly. That is from there. But a lot of people live in an ugly world and they're happy with an ugly. We live in an ugly world.
But the
many
great
ways.
ones.
I mean, there's oppressions, there's things that go on,
right.
and we just go and it goes on. And we're on the edge of ecological disaster, and we've got all kinds of nuclear holocaust hanging over our head, and people are just going along, just living fine and doing their little bit.
But only because...
I mean, normal people, or in academia as well.
Right.
But there aren't very many people of vision. I mean, where are the people of vision? In the arts, or in politics, or in economics, or in anything else? There aren't. But I didn't mean to take you away from the history of the standard model.
But this is, you're getting up to exactly where I want to be.
All right.
And that is that historically some physicists were content to be a little bureaucrat working on the properties of the 20th quark in the 30th Yang Mills sector or whatever, without looking at the big picture.
Right.
And that's what Einstein always taught us to do, look at the big picture.
Right.
And when people laughed at Einstein in the 30s and 40s, the young Turks and the young physicists laughing at Einstein, saying that you don't understand anything about mesons and protons and neutrons, Einstein kept saying, look at the big picture, the big unifying cosmic themes. And these young Turks would say, there is no unifying picture. All we are bureaucrats.
Right.
Life is a bureaucracy.
You just don't know what you're talking about, because if you come in here, I'll show you many, it's the life of the specialist. Yeah, okay.
And Einstein, even though people laughed at him, for 30 years of his life at the Institute for Advanced Study, insisted there should be a unifying cosmic theme to the whole thing. That's the difference between reductionists and holists. A bureaucrat is a reductionist. A bureaucrat believes that if you understand, the monetary system of Bosnia in the year 1950, you will all of a sudden solve all the problems of the universe. That's the reductionist approach. The holistic approach is trying to look at the big picture, the unifying cosmic themes that makes geopolitics possible. Now, Einstein's theory has been in eclipse for the last 30 years because most physicists began to specialize. We became bureaucrats.
Well, okay.
Very good bureaucrats.
Specialization is the way to go. That's the way to get the research grants. That's the way to get the money. That's the way to get the thing. If you specialize and you can keep your knowledge scarce and you can keep it so nobody else can understand it, then you can keep a certain amount of value. In order to economics. There's probably some economic reality to some of the stuff that's going on. And if you're a comprehensivist, you have, as Fuller was, for instance, let's say, that is a threat to the people who are in those specialized fields, and they will chip away at anything like that. There's not systems analysis or comprehensive understanding of these things.
And for the last 40 years of particle physics, looking at the products of smashing atoms, billions of dollars of taxpayers' money.
That's where all the money went.
Going to Fermilab outside Chicago, going to the Brookhaven lab in Long Island, going to the SSC, which was canceled outside Dallas, Texas. All this...
Which you were unhappy about.
I was very unhappy about.
You were unhappy about it. You wanted more money to go down that place.
That's right, because...
You wanted, there's still more money to go.
Because...
And you know, I found something interesting, if I may, Michio Kaku, is I read a thing the other day, I had a piece in the paper that when Eisenhower gave his farewell address to the nation, warned against the military-industrial complex, we say, that he originally wrote that we have to be warned against the military-industrial scientific complex. And his science advisor had him take out science, you know. But anyway, but that would have gobbled up $20-some billion of our gross national product.
11.
And people would have had 11, and it would have had to go homeless in order to be able to just find a couple more quarks.
Now let's.
Now, you wanted that to happen, and you're a comprehensively concerned person and so forth.
But you see, that's not the way the SSC should have been pitched.
The super collider,
The super collider, to be based outside Dallas, Texas, was to take us beyond the standard model, the next step. See, a paradigm shift can never be visualized by a bureaucrat. A bureaucrat does not even know that there is a paradigm, that there is a reigning mode of thinking. And a shift in that mode of thinking is very threatening to a bureaucrat, because a bureaucrat could be out of a job.
That's right. That's all they're concerned about, usually, is their immediate security of them and their family.
That's right. So for the last 40 years, we physicists quantum physicists have been bureaucrats. And Out of this, we've constructed something. The best shot that we have is called a standard model. A standard model with a bunch of quarks, a bunch of Yang-Millsfield, and ugly as hell. And we know that the universe is ultimately going to be simple. Everything in our fiber points to a simple, comprehensive, unifying universe, except we don't have it. So therefore, we wanted to build an SSC outside Dallas, Texas, $11 billion, to go to the next level. What I expected the SSC to begin to find the glimmerings of was the 10th dimension. We're talking about recreating creation itself. We're talking about a mini Big Bang outside Dallas, Texas, recreating the conditions of the origin of the universe itself. And that's not how we pitched it to the United States Congress. It's very unfortunate that most physicists cannot talk. We cannot speak English.
What was the difference between that one and the ones that had gone, the collider in Europe or the other colliders that we've had?
The previous colliders all put together the best shot, which was a standard model. This super ugly, grotesquely awkward-looking theory that is the ultimate theory of quarks.
I'm talking about the technology. The super collider technology.
Oh, the technology is the same.
What was the difference?
The technology is basically the same, except the energy scale is now beyond the energy of the standard model. We're now beginning to recreate the conditions of the birth of the universe itself. We're talking about creating, in some sense, a mini Big Bang outside Dallas, Texas.
Okay, listen, let's go back. Kaluza-Klein, they had that, it resurrected it, and it brought it up to the, and we have the standard model, we talked about that, and it's brought it up to now superstring theory.
That's right.
Now,
so
talk to us about that.
So 10 years ago, there was this impasse that the relativists, the people who work on Einstein's theory, did not understand what came before the Big Bang. That's religion, they said. That's mysticism. They didn't understand what's at the center of a black hole, because at the center of the black hole, Einstein's theory predicts there should be a time machine of all things. You should be able to fall into a black hole and wind up through the Einstein-Rosen wormhole into another era of space and time.
Another universe.
Another universe. And then the quantum theory came to a halt because we had the standard model, this stupid, ugly-looking theory called the standard model, the best shot we had.
And it could not accommodate gravity.
And it could not accommodate gravity. It was a sick theory, and it was the best shot, the best we could do. Then 10 years ago, this whole thing changed. 10 years ago, we realized that the key could be little strings vibrating in 10-dimensional space-time.
Back to Kaluza-Klein.
Resurrecting the old idea of Kaluza. Modernize it, putting in these little quantum strings, and then recasting it in modern language. And then we found out the standard model was for free. The simplest, lowest level vibration of the string became the standard model. And as strings moved in space and time, it forced the universe itself to curve the way Einstein wanted it to curve. And here we now have a master synthesis at the price of, mathematics and comprehension and physical experiments that are beyond human abilities at the present time. The SSC might have been able to look at the tail of the lion. The tail of the lion is not the lion.
Einstein used that term.
Yeah, he used the metaphor of the lion. Just because you see the tail of a lion doesn't mean that there isn't a lion duck.
There's a lion out there.
There's a lion out there.
And also the idea that trying to understand these things is that the space or the context within which they were trying to understand these things was too small, as they would put it. Again, trying to get to another dimension in order to be able to see the beauty and the integrity of these things. Edward Witten is a physicist at Princeton who is a lion or a major force, and he said that the superstring theory, almost in a certain sense, forced or gave us gravity, or was able to accommodate it, where the standard model could not.
That's right.
And that's important.
Gravity is for free.
And a good deal of what's coming out of the Princeton Advanced Center is important in terms of the superstring model. I have something, do you mind, in the audience, or if you, it's from your book, it's something that I found particularly interesting, and maybe you can help me with some of the language here and everything, but is it heterotic? Heterotic string consists of a closed string that has two types of vibrations, clockwise and counterclockwise. Okay? You understand this?
That's right.
Which are treated differently. The clockwise vibration live in a 10-dimensional space. The counterclockwise live in a 26-dimensional space, of which 6 dimensions have been compactified. In parentheses you have, we recall that in Kaluza's original 5-dimension theory, the 5-dimension was compactified by being wrapped into a circle. And then over here you have, then it says, this then is the mathematical expression of the central theme of the book, or that the laws of physics simplify in higher dimensions. But then you said, so for the first time, pure geometry is given a simple explanation of why the subatomic world must necessarily exhibit certain symmetries that emerge from the curling up of higher dimensional space. And you italicize, the symmetries of the subatomic realm are but remnants of the symmetry of higher dimensional space.
That's right.
Now, can you address those thoughts?
Okay.
Because this superstring, 10-dimensional, 28 6-dimensional superstring, and the resonances of them is the basic stuff of which we could build a theory of everything, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
Okay.
You see, when we humans respond to an ice crystal, we look at the beauty, the symmetry of 6 points. When we look at the symmetry of a seashell, when we look at the symmetry of stars, when we look at the symmetry of atoms, at a very deep fundamental level, we are responding to the symmetries of nature. But where do these symmetries come from? We live in a shattered world, a world where the interactions of the universe don't look like anything else. The gravity does not look like light. Light does not look like the nuclear force. The nuclear force does not look like gravity. However, at the instant of the Big Bang, we think that the universe was perfectly symmetrical, that the symmetries of an ice crystal, symmetries that we find in the atom, were perfect symmetries of the Big Bang itself. And we now think that the Big Bang itself took place in 10-dimensional hyperspace. That in the beginning, before Genesis, before Genesis, okay, in the beginning was the void, the mist. It was a 10-dimensional void. A void in 10 dimensions with all the symmetries of 10-dimensional space intact. It was a perfect crystal, but of course useless, because you cannot have people if everything is perfect. It's very boring, in fact, living in a perfect world. But it's like water boiling. Think of boiling water that's superheated. All of a sudden, the symmetry of water is broken, and all of a sudden you have bubbles forming, quantum bubbles, and these bubbles expand very rapidly. Well, we physicists believe that in the beginning was nothing, but nothing was unstable, because in the beginning was the quantum. And the quantum principle believes that things should be unstable. When things became unstable, the 10-dimensional theory compactified, that is, curled up into little bubbles, and these bubbles began to expand very rapidly, and that is the Big Bang.
That is
the Big Bang, according to this principle, the quantum principle of quantum cosmology, says that the universe started off as a bubble in nothing. Cosmic nothing, okay? And the bubbles begin to expand very rapidly, and that is what the Big Bang is. So in other words, the Big Bang has an origin that took place before the instant of creation. That out of cosmic nothing, water is boiling all the time. That there should be parallel universes out there.
That there should be parallel
universes out there.
Right.
Outside our universe. Now, the person pushing this theory the most is Stephen Hawking.
Yes.
Stephen Hawking even wrote a book just a few months ago called Cosmology and Baby Universes.
Right.
And these are baby universes. Bubbles forming, frothing bubbles in the sea of nothing. And that our universe is just nothing but one such bubble, connected by wormholes, little tubes, to these other bubbles. Okay? Now, where did these bubbles come from? They came from 10-dimensional nothing, the compactification, the wrapping up of 10-dimensional space. So in other words, the origin of the universe comes ultimately from 10-dimensional space.
The 10-dimensional and the 26-dimensional comes from the mathematics?
The mathematics, that's
and that the mathematics fit together, including gravity,
that's
and
right.
They fit together into something other than what was ugly?
That's right.
Is the standard model?
This is, in some sense, pure mathematics.
Yeah.
That, in some sense, God may be a mathematician. That in the beginning was nothing, but the principle of the quantum, which says that things must be unstable. Even nothing was unstable.
Well, it could be, like in a certain sense, that there's an, I don't know if it could be an a priori mystery, or there's, Fuller would say synergies of behavioral systems unpredicted by the sum of its parts. There's something more than the sum of the parts. He always had a sort of notion of an a priori mysterious design. There's design in the universe? I heard you say God.
Well,
there is, and you talk about God in two senses. One is the God of miracles, and one is the God of design, if I understand.
That's right.
Science. And Mr. Einstein had belief in something like a design in universe or something.
That's right.
It's a design, and it's 10-dimensional. Super strings, vibrations of super strings is what is behind all that we are able to understand as existent within the universe.
That's right. Now let me explain.
Now this is and its resonances.
That's right. So let me explain. When a string vibrates, like a violin string,
Yeah.
it resonates.
Right.
Each resonance is called a note, A, B, C, D.
Right.
When a superstring vibrates, it has resonances. Each resonance is a note called a particle of nature. When all these violin strings vibrate in harmony, okay, harmonies are called laws of physics.
Right.
The laws of physics are the harmonies of the string. And when they all vibrate in a symphony is called the universe.
All right, right.
So the universe is a symphony of strings, in the same way that my body is nothing but a symphony of DNA strings.
All right, it's a symphony of DNA strings, and suppose there is an operative within your body, then all of a sudden there develops something that is like a runaway cell that we call a cancer. So then your body is not a symphony of a perfect harmony, it becomes a symphony of dis-ease or dis-quietude.
Well, there are rogue strings.
Rogue strings.
Right.
And this
rogue
sort of
DNA strings
things,
that
right.
cannibalize healthy DNA strings.
And Peck is a famous, he's got a book that's been on the best-selling list. Is it Peck? I think he's got the Road Less Well-Traveled. And or Buckminster Fuller
for a long time.
Yeah, but over 10 years now it's been on the best-selling list. And his thing comes down basically the same as Bucky Fuller, as he began to cast about and trying to understand, is there any purpose in universe? And
Let's
if
talk
there
about
is,
that. Yeah.
in terms of law of second thermodynamics, the second law is that all systems tend to move toward absolute zero or chaos, the limits of the system. Fuller used to advocate, so does Peck, although I think Fuller is much more tied into the idea of synergy. Its behavior systems unpredict, there's a certain uncertainty in the universe, but that it's moving across entropy and bringing increased patterns of understanding to the process of which we are a part, has something to do with the biological evolutionary purpose or human biological evolutionary purpose of the human species. We begin to get at some notion of what human existence within the universe is to move across entropy and to bring increased patterns of understanding.
Right.
Does any of that make sense, or how does it fit in, as particularly with your sense of superstring being the basic understanding of these vibrations, and this synergy being, in a systems analysis, synergy being the resonancy of interaccommodating systems, which seems to be operative within the structure of the universe, that there is a resonancy, there's something more than the sum of the parts of a maximally engaged system. I don't know if I put words in there that shouldn't be there, but you understand a couple things to chew on.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Fuller, as second law of thermodynamics.
Okay, let's talk about
why are we here?
The sweep
why
of
is the universe
history
here?
and why we're basically here and where we're basically going. You mentioned, first of all, the road not taken, okay? And there's a fork in the road, and that we always regret perhaps making the wrong decision at that fork. Well, we, in some sense, are at a fork in the road. Because if this theory is correct, and I repeat, this theory has not yet been proven, the SSC was canceled, that was our best shot to look at echoes from the 10th dimension, that is, particles that could be seen as vibrations of the string. But it was canceled, $11 billion machine canceled by the United States Congress last year.
We're $4 trillion in deficit, my friend. You know,
that's right.
We have fiscal restraints.
That's right. But the greatest, personally, by the way, now that we're on the area of physical restraints, the Star Wars program gets still $4 billion a year. $4 billion a year.
Right.
3 years of funding for a harebrained scheme called the Star Wars system could have fully funded the window on creation, as we physicists like to call it. But we are at a fork in the road, in the sense that one part of the fork could take us to an age of Aquarius, that we are now on the verge of understanding a mastery of all fundamental forces. Now think about that. The mastery of gravity unleashed what we call the machine age. The mastery of the electromagnetic force gave us the electric age. The mastery of the nuclear force, which we haven't quite mastered yet, but it has given us the atomic age. Now think of what happens when we master all fundamental forces. We could eliminate poverty, ignorance, disease. Again, not overnight, but over the next several decades and centuries. But look at the other fork in the road. The other fork in the road, we could literally wipe ourselves out because there are still on the order of 50, 60,000 nuclear weapons on the planet Earth. We are destroying the ozone layer. In fact, in Australia and New Zealand, they have ozone alerts every few days to warn people not to go to the beach. We're beginning to have that in the United States. The Weather Bureau.
This new thing that's just, yeah, go ahead.
The Weather Bureau has announced that they're now going to give ultraviolet alert days because it's degrading now at about 0.5% a year over some parts of North America.
Frightening.
Very frightening.
Right.
Or the greenhouse effect can wipe us out. So we're at a fork in the road. An age of Aquarius, because we'll have the mastery of all fundamental forces, or on the other hand, universal destruction because of the destruction of the environment and the destruction of the ozone layer and the greenhouse effect. Now, my personal point of view is as follows, that on the big time scale now of thousands of years, the people who will begin to harness this kind of force, that is the ability to punch a hole in space, to be able to bend time into a pretzel, and the ability the ability to then leap into the 10th dimension, that's not for us. But it may be for extraterrestrial life in outer space.
At this time, it could be.
At this time. Now, I'm not talking about...
us in the future.
Or it could be us in the future. Maybe tourists from the future may visit us. But I'm not talking about little green men that you read about in the National Enquirer. When we physicists look in outer space and realize that civilizations out there may in fact have been able to harness the Planck energy, the energy of the string itself.
In fact, the probability theory tells us that it's almost certain they have.
Probability theory tells us just within our galaxy that perhaps there are 10,000 planets with intelligent life forms on them. Okay, just by looking at what is called Drake's equation for the Milky Way galaxy. Now, if this is true, when we physicists look in outer space, we have to categorize them by energy, because that's what we're talking about. This whole thing is about energy. 10,000 years ago on an energy scale, we were indistinguishable from the animals.
That's right.
The Ice Age was just beginning to melt. We hunted in wolf packs, and we were literally indistinguishable from animals. Aliens coming from outer space would say that there are human animals, crab animals, and snake animals, and we would just be among them. As the ice melted, we had energy on the scale of our arms, maybe 1/8 of a horsepower. We were very feeble creatures. But with the domestication of a horse, we began to have 1 horsepower.
But we also had, go ahead.
Finally, with Newton's unleashing the laws of mechanics, we had steam power. And all of a sudden, we went from 1 horsepower, that is 1 horse, to perhaps 50 horsepower that we could have in a locomotive, a steam locomotive.
That are extended, that in a certain sense, the extension of our consciousness, which technology is, gave us increased power or technologically augmented capability to make the environment other than that which was given in an Eden-like sense.
And then with the internal combustion engine,
which was in a certain sense unique to the human species.
Right, because we're sentient.
Birds make nests, and some things manipulate things, but in a certain sense, to manipulate the outer environment from internal consciousness and extensions of technology is rather unique to the human species.
Yeah, the essence of intelligence, forget IQ tests and that kind of nonsense. The essence of intelligence is the ability to change the environment around you. And we humans can change the environment around us on a scale unparalleled in the animal kingdom. Okay? And when we do this, as I said before, we have maybe 50 horsepower with steam engines with the internal combustion engine. You take an afternoon drive with 200 horses underneath your hood.
That's right.
And then with nuclear weapons, you now have literally millions of horsepower that is at your disposal.
But that's not very much at our disposal. We were able to tap the electromagnetic spectrum, but the nuclear force has not been able to deliver very much positive other than your radiation therapies and hospitals and so forth. We're very primitive in terms of tapping into the tremendous energy on the level of thousands and millions of energy equivalencies that the atomic systems did make available, because we're beginning to tap into the sun and the power of the sun and the power of the atom.
That's right. Forget fission power. Fission power was a mistake. You know, nuclear power plants, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, a complete waste of money, tremendously dangerous technology. Fusion may be the way to go. Clean, efficient. We don't have it yet. We may not have it in another 20, 30 years.
It keeps being just over the horizon,
But at least fusion power is a piece of the sun brought down to the earth, and to energize our machines with a piece of the sun. Now, as I said before, even that is not sufficient to manipulate the superstring theory. That is, to be able to create time machines, and that's what some physicists are now proposing in the pages of Physical Review magazine, to create wormholes, that is, looking glass universe where we can literally punch a hole in space and leap into another galaxy. That kind of energy scale is simply not for us, even with our atomic bombs.
That may allow us, if we could tap into the energy of the sun or the galaxy, then it might be in a future time frame when when the universe reaches absolute zero, we might be able to escape to the second law and go to another universe.
Perhaps.
Perhaps, you know, that's way down the line.
Right.
But now we have a question of survival of our species because we are quite literally physically able, and you understand from a physics perspective, to, with atomic weaponry, to destroy our species
That's
for the
right.
first time within about the last 15 years or so.
That's right. Of all the generations that have lived on the surface of the Earth, and we've been on the Earth for about 2 million years, the most important generation is a generation now living today. Because Australopithecus and Cro-Magnon man, they could not destroy the whole species at the same time. With the greenhouse effect and ozone depletion and nuclear weapons, 50,000 of them in the world approximately, we have the ability for the first time to destroy all life. Now, when we look in the heavens for extraterrestrial life, we look for radio signals. We see nothing out to 100 light years.
We're it.
Out to 100 light years of the Earth, we see nothing. No radiation, no television, no radio. Now, we as a planet have been broadcasting radio and television for the last 50, 60, 70 years. You realize that there's a sphere about 60 light years in diameter surrounding the planet Earth, growing at the speed of light. Inside that sphere is I Love Lucy, Leave It to Beaver, The Shadow, and Amos and Andy.
And now conversations with Kaku.
That's right,
Which is
traveling
going
at
out
the
next
speed
week.
of light.
Yeah, right.
Traveling at the speed
Right.
of light around
Right.
the planet Earth.
Right.
However, when we look for other spheres from other planets hitting our planet, we see nothing. My personal point of view, and this is very personal, is that I think that when we go to the stars, if we don't blow ourselves up, and we visit these planets that have Earth-like atmospheres, we will see dead planets. We will see planets with their ozone layers blown off. We'll see planets that are super hot because of the greenhouse effect.
People that took the wrong turn in the road.
We'll see cities radioactive because they took the wrong fork in the road.
Right.
Okay? Now, I only hope that we have the wisdom to take this technology, the technology of the mastery of all forces now, into an age of Aquarius, into an age where we can begin to grow on the level of technology. Now, when we physicists look at outer space, we look at 3 kinds of civilizations. A type 1 civilization is a civilization that harnesses truly planetary power. They can control the weather, mine the ocean, control earthquakes. Their energy comes from the center of the Earth. A type 2 civilization gets its energy from the sun, not just by solar energy. When they need energy for their machines, they go out and just grab a piece of the sun and just put it in their gas tank. That's a type 2 civilization. A type 3 civilization is a galactic civilization, one that has its energy from the center of the galaxy itself, where there may be millions of black holes. Now, on this cosmic scale, think of Star Trek and Asimov and other science fiction stories.
Yeah.
Star Trek, for example, would be a type 2 civilization because they're just on the verge of igniting stars.
But we are in a zero civilization.
We're type 0 civilization, right?
And we're at the fork in the road.
And we're at the fork in the road. We may never attain type 1 status.
Probability theory would say that we probably won't. Probably most haven't. Is there any way of judging that? There's no way of knowing. We haven't heard.
There's no way of knowing, and the fact that we see radio silence out to 100 light years is not a very good indication.
And we're at a time then where we can destroy ourselves, and we're also at a time, I wonder if the obverse of that, again, back to Bucky Fuller, grand old man that he was, he said, he postulated that it may be that we were crossing a point where all of our human institutions had evolved within a fundamental condition of scarcity. But he said with elegance of design, he had a term, ephemeralization, of doing more with less. Being communication satellites can communicate much more effectively. The microprocessor. And doing more with less with an elegance of design, we might be able to transcend the fundamental condition of scarcity, which had been the reality within which human institutions had evolved, and be able to see that we could build our institutions in a fundamental condition of understanding without raping the planet, and being able to do it in an ecologically appropriate way and design with nature, and that we're at a fork in the road where we have to discover this collectively, and that we have to utilize in a systems way the whole of the human species, and perhaps in a Gaia sense or Gaia sense, have that there are the whole of this biological evolutionary process is of a unit as an organism. Rupert Sheldrake talks in terms of morphic resonancy and sees the universe in organism terms. And there's no distinction between animate and inanimate, but we have a time when we have that opportunity of transcending scarcity and building a condition that is unprecedented in terms of the 200,000-year experience of the human species?
Right.
We only have a couple of minutes to fit that in.
Right.
Your answer.
I think that scarcity has been the fundamental emotion driving human history. That is, if you take a look at the emotion that most humans experience right now, at this very second, it is hunger.
Yeah.
Hunger and, of course, the fear of disease are the emotions experienced most by humans. But on this evolutionary scale, we're going exponentially rising, and within 100, 200 years, perhaps we can envision a Type 1 civilization, a civilization on the Earth with planetary energy, planetary resources, a planetary government, in fact, unified because we have raw energy by which we can end the scarcity which has driven human history since we came out of the swamp.
I understand. That's 100 years from now. I'm talking about now, 1994, coming up to 2000, whether we have transcended, instead of it being an idealistic projection of what we would like to think, but in realistic terms, particularly with these energy availabilities that the physics show is the reality, that the reality no longer is one that the fundamental condition of the people within this system and ecologically, the reality of scarcity no longer is an appropriate model by which we are to socially engineer spaceship Earth. It's no longer epistemologically or ontologically correct to have to say there is not enough. We can say there is enough if we have proper design and proper institutions now. If we're to survive in the zero civilization situation, to maybe perhaps have our progeny reach stage number 1, as you say, galactically.
Well, yes
We're
and
at
no.
that point in the road now.
If you take a look at the European societies,
left,
the European societies have reached a point of overabundance whereby the European societies have polluted most of the earth. Most of the pollution comes not from the third world, comes from the first world.
Right.
The third world hasn't even had a chance yet to pollute the world,
Right.
and that's where tremendous danger lies. China, for example, wants to refrigerate its society. It should refrigerate it, but that means that we have to discover technologies that will allow them to refrigerate their society without destroying the ozone layer with CFCs in the process.
Exactly.
So most of the world is still in the paradigm of scarcity and hunger. The advanced sector, that is the European sector, because it reached technology first, because Newton and Einstein and all these great minds were Europeans and unleashed these forces on the earth, there the society has to take responsibility for developing ecologically safe technologies by which the Chinas of the world can also modernize without blowing off the ozone layer and setting off the greenhouse effect.
And that brings it into a question of some people would say we are an organism that there's all this detritus within the DNA thing that we don't need. Are there excess people we don't need? Do only a few people have to reach this state? Do we have to have a democratic order? Do we have to involve everyone? Is this orchestra one where all the instruments within the Philharmonic Orchestra of the human society play, or can only a few play? We have to work these things out. This is the realm of the geopoliticians, the realm of the existential challenge that confronts us now. Lessons are brought to us from physics. Lessons are brought to people with ecological concern like yourself. The book is Hyperspace by Michio Kaku. It's been your pleasure to have this extended conversation with him. Great pleasure. He talks to these issues that are of great immediate import in terms of the operation of this interrelated spaceship Earth. We only just got started, Michio. We've been talking for hours.
We're still just scratching the surface.
And these issues will still be there, but thank you really very, very much indeed.
Okay.
Been a pleasure as always talking with you. Pleasure for you to have his perception. I invite you to tune in again next week. We'll be coming back conversations again next week, addressing some of the issues that have been raised here. And again, thank you for viewing. We'll see you next week. And Michio, once again, thank you very, very much indeed. See you next week.